well, Albanese was saying, oh, this rewiring the nation is going to cost just $20 billion. Are you kidding? It's going to be multiples of that, multiples. We already see many of the transition projects, transmission lines, 2 or 3 times over budget. So don't believe that for a second, people. But, you know, then again, you mentioned Matt Kean, supposedly a Liberal, right? This insanity has gone to both sides of politics. You've got no respite from either. Tell me, Mark, how did we get into this mess where Australia, with huge deposits of coal and gas and oil and uranium, now faces energy shortages because we're telling ourselves we can't use any of that?
Well, there's a few elements there. One is the God complex that Matt Kean has got. I mean, all politicians have an ego, but if you start to believe your own rhetoric can save the planet, you do anything, you do any silly thing. And New South Wales, with 0.4% of global emissions, we can't save the planet. We need to save our electricity grid and energy security and do something about the cost of living crisis. But we can't have any influence whatsoever. In fact, my office, through the Parliamentary Library and some of the institutions in Britain, did an analysis. If you bundle together Kean's remaking of the entire electricity grid, all the stuff about hydrogen, electric vehicles, about the green energy subsidies that run into tens of billions of dollars in New South Wales. If you bundle that together, what's the net impact on the global temperatures? Kean won't answer that question. He doesn't know the outcome or won't own up to it. The answer that came back from the library was 0.00055 degrees Celsius over a century, so essentially nothing. So it's a God complex thinking you can save.
I actually think that's an exaggeration. That is an exaggeration, because I think that figure is actually for the entire country, and that depends on a lot of the presumptions about the sensitivity of the climate to our emissions is true, and there's a lot of debate about that too.
Yeah, but the figure is so small,
one day
Andrew,
people wake up to this.
It's virtually nothing. It's virtually nothing. So if it's an exaggeration, the real answer is zero. The real answer is zero. And look, it can't be measured. And Matt Kean's great-great-grandkids won't see any result that they notice in 100 years' time. So the whole proposition is ludicrous.
Oh, they'll see it if they drove through the countryside.
They'll
see it if they drove through the countryside.
I'm talking about the impact on global temperatures. And the other big factor is money talks, Andrew. Money talks. The renewable rent seekers are all over the Liberal Party. All over them. I mean, the money talks, and these people are getting money for nothing. I mean, they're getting so many government subsidies for doing everything that they've got their hand out. You've never seen a rent-seeking industry created overnight, but that's what Matt Kean has done. So it's a combination of ego and money.
I've got two questions I want to ask you about Paul Keating. And one, I'm going to draw from my well-used copy of the Latham diaries that you wrote after ending as Labor leader. A wonderful quote. But first, Paul Keating, the former Labor Prime Minister. His attack on Labor yesterday and his defence, his disgusting defence of the Chinese dictatorship, was frankly deranged, if you ask me. And I invite people to stick on for the end of the show where we're going to fact check something. Now, you knew him very well. You still know him. Was he always like this, or has something gone a little wrong?
Well, it was a very colourful display, and I suppose he hopped into a whole range of journalists, calling Peter Harcher old acid drop is classic Keatingism. Paul's a long time out of elected office, nearly 30 years now, actually. So the rhetoric's become more colourful, and the analysis. The key point here, was the analysis correct? Was the analysis in Australia's best national security interest? The answer is no. And I think the thing you're going to quote from the Latham diaries, we're in sync on one thing, Andrew. We've both got good books on our library shelves that we can rely on. So I think the thing you're going to quote there goes to the heart of why it was inaccurate.
Well, let me now quote from the Latham diaries. I'm surprised this book doesn't burn in my hands. It's written with such verve. Mark, you talk about Paul Keating ringing you in 1999, your Labor leader. He phones you and he says, Paul explained his strategy with Indonesia. Now, this is Paul Keating, who says we shouldn't rely on the US, we shouldn't rely on Britain to defend ourselves from China. In fact, China's not even a threat. That's what he said yesterday. Not even a threat. Paul explained his strategy with Indonesia, the purpose of his 1995 defence pact. And he says this, and I'm quoting Paul, you're quoting Paul. What I wanted to do was put their 200 million people, 200 million Indonesians, in the front line, their army our weapons. That was our frontline defence of Australia if China ever went as bad as some people said it could. Can you explain? How do you marry that with what he said yesterday?
Well, you can't. You can't. And it's a shame that none of the young journalists there have got any memory of Australian political history. And they didn't say to him, Mr. Keating, you signed up a defence pact with Indonesia, with Suharto in 1995. Is this what you mean by security within Asia? Is that what you mean by that phrase, security within Asia? And they could have even quoted from my book to say, was your theory that Indonesia would be our buffer if China ever went bad? His words quoted verbatim in my diaries, if China ever went bad. And of course, in some part, China has gone very bad on Australia. The relationship is soured. We've had this interference in our domestic politics. So that scenario's come about. But it raises the more important question, Andrew. What is Australia's national interest? To have a security arrangements, a defence pact with Indonesia, who in military terms couldn't blow out a candle, or to have an alliance with the United States and the UK with these nuclear subs and other military hardware for the defence of Australia in the medium to longer term. Now, no one in their right mind would say that Indonesia is the answer for Australia if China goes bad on us, goes really bad and there's aggression and conflict. So Keating, by his own words in 1999, yesterday's presentation didn't count for a can of beans. You know, it was sort of embarrassing to him in terms of what he said when he was talking about his own strategy as Prime Minister of Australia in 1995 to sign up with the Indonesians.
It's just extraordinary to me that this man would 24 years ago think that we did need to defend ourselves from China, but would get Indonesians to fight for us. And today he says, no, China's not a threat. We can't even rely on the Americans, who might actually put up a better struggle for our safety. I mean, it's just crazy. Mark, you won 2 seats at the last New South Wales election. The next election's Sunday week. You've since been joined by Tanya Mihaluk. If you get a result like that, or better this time around, you're probably going to be the kingmaker in the upper house of the New South Wales Parliament. How are you going to use that power?
Well, the likely scenario, according to the polling, is Labor might fall a bit short in the lower house and they'll need the Greens in an alliance, like we saw in the Gillard area, we've seen in Tasmania, a Labor-Green alliance in the lower house, and the Greens will be demanding drug legalisation, gender fluidity teaching in schools, and even crazier rush to renewables, closed coal and gas yesterday. So we'll be trying to block that kind of green madness. You need one nation in the upper house as an insurance policy, as a handbrake on the extremes of a Labor-Green alliance in the lower house. But the other thing, Andrew, the feedback I'm getting from the public is that they're very disillusioned with the two-party system and they're urging on one nation to disrupt it, to shake up the two-party duopoly. You know, Labor and Liberal have had it to themselves for a long, long while, and people are saying the competition, the disruption is good. One nation can be an alternative to show these major parties they're on notice. They're not doing a very good job. They're losing support. We've seen that, and one nation is the alternative to shake them up.
Mate, anyone knowing you, and I've followed your political career for decades, knows that if you want to shake up, you've come to the right address with Mark Latham. Thank you so much indeed for your time.
A pleasure. Thank you, Andrew. Good to be back on your show.
Well, let's do it again if we can bear it, because I think the viewers deserve it.
A bit of a stoush is good for your spirits.
You.
Don't worry. Thank you.